Looking around her, the girl could not enjoy the pleasant scenery from the snow when she finally realized that she got out of the endless darkness. She could feel it when an icy snowflake landed on the tip of her nose. She couldn't tell if the winter air was so icy or if the sky rose so high above the ground for a few more seconds. Focusing all of her attention on the situation she was in now, the girl completely failed to notice how her body began to shiver from the cold. With her last strength, she tried to be conscious because she did not want to die in such a way. Such an ardent desire was connected with a powerful thirst for revenge. However, this thirst was also noticed by an unknown person who was passing by the snowy forest. As if entering the situation of a girl, he asked strangers if his stepmother felt a similar feeling. Looking back at the man, the girl immediately recognized a familiar face, causing her to be surprised, along with annoyed, while his face remained fairly calm. The face of the wanderer was terribly similar to the face of the adopted son of Archduke Richt, which at the same time made the girl wonder what exactly the boy wanted by helping her. But he said without any deception that he really needed only one favor from the girl. He wondered if the poor abandoned girl's thirst for revenge was so powerful that she could include the boy's desire to get rid of the emperor. The fact that her heart was not the only one with the same desired thirst for revenge brought a spark of admiration to her face. The events of that very snowy day started the events of revenge, which the girl is after. Among the nobles and all the rich, auctions were quite common. The rich loudly shouted their bids for the next lot at the auction, which was a mysterious boy of Western nationality, the final bid for which was equal to about 2,000 gold. All this was observed by the owner of the auction, Hilarion, who rejoiced at the profitable day. His expectations came true, but it turned out that selling people is much more profitable than just killing them. But also, in addition to the profitable business, he also noticed an unknown visitor among the guests of the auction. Even without knowing all the details, Hilarion assumed that such a rather adult visitor to his event came from a rather wealthy family. But all his requests with important papers and analysis of an unexpected guest were interrupted by a loud cry, which was caused by the unexpected appearance of a charming beauty, quite young. Continuing to listen to all the bets that were declared in the direction of the girl, the man watched all this, opened his mouth. He did not remember that among all his goods he had such a girl. Collecting his spirit, Hilarion realized that although the reaction of the hall was so violent, he could not sell the product that was omitted from the letter because it could entail dangerous consequences. Approaching the young beauty, he apologized in front of all the rich, little by little starting to lead the girl in the other direction. As an excuse for this, the man said that he only wanted to present to all visitors the goods that should be at the next auction. All this time, the girl behaved in accordance with all requirements. She silently followed Hilarion, lowering her eyes to the floor. And the way she raised her nose reminded the man a little of that woman. But in a moment, an offer of equal 100,000 gold was heard from the hall. It came from a new visitor who wanted to make a deal right now. A slight look of panic appeared on the auctioneer's face as he informed the buyer that he could put that kind of money into a house that was also auctioned off in Hilarion's possessions. However, the unknown man continued to offer the man a deal, notifying him that he would not mind buying from him the place where the auction was taking place. According to the owner of the auction himself, this noble allowed himself 2 loud statements, but he continued to remain calm, informing that this item will not go anywhere because they remain loyal to their customers. Hearing the lies from Hilarion's lips, the charming girl decided not to stay away, noting that there could not be any loyalty, even mentioned among their attitude to everything. The girl did not hesitate in her decisions when an electrified aura began to appear around her. The man violated loyalty to his clients by refusing their requests. Her ultimate decision in making this deal was to destroy Hilarion if he didn't want to do it peacefully, only not noticing that the girl crossed all the limits of what is allowed as an ordinary auction item. The man called the security. However, it was already too late, and a sharp sword blade appeared in her hands, which moved much faster than the bodies of all the guards. As if demonstrating dance movements, the girl moved from one opponent to another, leaving behind a trail of defeated enemies. The beauty also helped with an aura that protected her at a fairly long distance. In her red, liquid-stained hands, she held a sword that was no less filthy. In an instant, the auction lost its familiar atmosphere, similar to all social events, as the girl began to approach Hilarion. Never answering the question about who she was, the girl did not want to negotiate, loving to put her husband in front of the fact. Grabbing him by the collar of his shirt, The girl didn't even show any emotion on her face as she lifted the grown man up. Holding him quite high above her, the girl asked him whether he recognized his old acquaintance in her. Wandering in his own thoughts, he remembered only one person who had such powerful strength and endurance, and her name was Charlotte. The girl gave him a satisfied smile as she realized that the person in front of her was as aware of her personality as she was of hers. What was certain was that that thief was locked in a safe place 5 years ago, and very recently he heard the news about the death of the same evil thief. The girl admitted that for some time these two were famous for getting rid of the emperor's competitors. However, now that the girl had taken the whole situation into her own hands, she had to see to it that her accomplice was eliminated as well. The man begged for mercy, if only as a sign of their former memories and loyalty. However, the concept of loyalty was unknown to a villain like Charlotte, and to any other villain. Addressing a girl named Zuzu, the Archduke's adopted son asked her how the feeling of achieving the first revenge was reflected in her soul. However, in the opinion of the one whose hands got dirty for the first time, this was not enough. She reported that until all her true traitors were exterminated, her soul would not find peace. Addressing the boy in the room, she reported that she had been moving around too much this evening, so she was extremely tired, so she asked Richard to hug her. In turn, the boy himself was quite interested in the fact that the girl refers to Count Katelu as an ordinary butler. However, she explained her behavior by the fact that she should embody the role of his bride. Actions should come from the heart. Even without being locked in the snowy mountain, Zuzu still continued to feel this horrible, eerie feeling, which was accompanied by a not-so-light tiredness. With the bride in his arms, the guy offered her a little rest, to which she happily agreed. Her eyes closed as she tried to get rid of all the unnecessary thoughts, thinking about the dream she wanted. She couldn't die right now, or anytime soon, until she got rid of all her sworn enemies. Recalling the events of her childhood, Charlotte remembered the conversation she heard from the servants of the imperial palace, that she was not the daughter of Her Majesty. Similar words sounded from the mouths of the maids who climbed the stairs to one of the floors of the palace. According to one of them, the daughter of her ladyship was allegedly completely different. Even in a fairly rural setting, Charlotte was the only one who did not receive an education befitting her place in the social world. In addition to pointing out all the girl's shortcomings, the same maid had the audacity to compare her lightness with a swan, and the girl herself with a crow. Charlotte was conscious of the fact that she was not her ladyship's daughter, and well understood that they were all quite reasonable. Even being an illegitimate child of Count Morn, the girl still felt a sense of turmoil in her soul, remembering such unpleasant words. In order to get rid of the unpleasant thoughts of all the conversations around her, Charlotte would go out into the garden, which was full of roses, and practice holding a wooden practice sword in her hands, which her brother had never used. She seemed to fall out of reality, and thought about what if a wonderful person came to the cage in which she was kept all her childhood and would save her. She could only dream of an unexpected guest on the doorstep of this cursed estate she used to call her home. But all her dreams ended before they could even begin, when she remembered that in this world she was just an ordinary, unremarkable crow. No person in life would agree with her liberators. She wondered if there was a person who, knowing her story, would want to do it. However, during these thoughts, she could not imagine that anyone could be walking nearby, except for the maids, who most often simply did not pay attention to her. She was sure that her hopes and dreams were impossible, but they were quickly as if a cloud was removed in front of him by an unknown boy who reached out to her and asked if she needed help. This guy was like a star in the eyes of a very small, desperate girl who came down to him straight from the sky. This star became the 7th Prince Albert, who had to experience a similar fate and find himself in such a small apartment by order of the emperor. But all the details were of little concern to the girl, because for her, Albert was a guiding star that the girl was not going to lose. The conversation with the 7th Prince went quite well, as he was very complimentary about Charlotte's swordsmanship skills, and pointed out that despite a terrible teacher, she had achieved such a result. The conversation did not end there, because in the dialogue, Albert also wanted to tell the girl about the aura, the power of the soul, which is activated with proper breathing. He suggested that the insecure girl try to master this skill, which she reported that she was completely unsure of her abilities because she did not know for sure that she had talent. Deciding to move on to the next topic rather quickly, the boy next to her informed her that they could let go of all formality and talk informally, since they were the same age. It was then that Charlotte turned into a butterfly that always followed the star everywhere. Albert always treated people like himself, regardless of their status, and with this attitude toward strangers, he found some impressive talent in the small settlement. Even hearing the conversations behind her back, Charlotte still felt pretty good because she now knew her way around. One starry evening, being in the clearing, they talked about the fact that Albert wished eternal life for his father, because every day the struggle for the place of the heir to the throne became more and more intense. Then he understood that it was also inevitable for him. He was only reassured by Charlotte informing him that he would definitely take the emperor's place when he ascended the throne. In exchange for this, he could promise the girl that under the condition, if she so desired, the bright crown of the empress would shine on her head. Albert was the star for Charlotte that gave her the chance to breathe again, so even if he didn't give her the pearly crown, she would still be fine. But in exchange for the fact that she was now free, all she had to do was dance for the seventh prince. Entering the room of the second prince in the role of a maid, the girl turned to him, as if starting a conversation, in order to offer him tea. However, even before he had time to shout at one of his maids again, she found his weak spot in the stomach. The dance that Charlotte was to perform for the seventh Prince Albert involved swords with which she struck her victims. For the sake of Albert, she even went so far as to spare the lives of several members of the imperial family. But then, when her work was done, she turned around and saw that her star had suddenly turned into an emperor. A real uproar arose around his accession to the imperial throne, because in such a relatively short period of time, all the remaining heirs disappeared without a trace, and the nobles began to discuss their guesses among themselves. No one, of course, could know exactly about all the efforts that had been made to encroach on this place, except the perpetrators themselves. Not long after the coronation of Albert as the new emperor, Charlotte entered one of the rooms of his estate, desiring to know the reason why His Highness sought her. However, even after hearing the sound of an open door and the voice of his acquaintance, he still kept his gaze on the view from the window of one of the rooms of his palace. Looking out the window, the guy reported that the girl had really put in a lot of effort so that he could be on top, but he would never be able to repay her in any way in his life. And the reason for summoning her to this room, he said, was that the girl could currently choose any position or title in exchange for her help. On the other hand, as if hiding something, she said that she did not need anything in return because it was enough for her to just help her friend. After all, Albert reported that he understood the girl, and now she can be free. But when she saw sadness on his face, the girl did not understand why. Why her star faded, and it was believed that it was her fault. Already being near the very throne of the emperor, the girl turned to Albert, asking whether he really reported that she had attacked Lady Batilda. He revealed that he had information from several of the girl's subordinates, including Hilarion, as well as a plan that was found in her estate. The signs pointed to the fact that she was indeed involved in this attack. Charlotte continued to claim that there had been a misunderstanding and appealed to the rest of the talented nobles to confirm that she was not involved. However, in response to this, they just stood aside, keeping silent and looking down. In this case, the emperor had no choice but to conclude that Charlotte Morden was deluded by the idea of becoming empress. But on the grounds that she was a public servant, he would not let her die, but remarked that in return, he would put her behind bars with broken knees and destroy her family. Such a conclusion revealed in her a real thief from a fairy tale, which always scared children. But the one who was jealous of the future empress, trying to harm her, turned out to be an unusual thief. It was a future she did not want at all. The people she thought were her best friends hurt her, trying to cage her again, tying her wings of freedom. They were involved in the fact that the girl remained doomed to certain death due to the lack of the ability to walk. Even when all hope seemed lost, she still continued to say that the accusations were false, and once she was behind bars, she never stopped waiting. She hoped that her truth would finally be known, and that she would be drafted into the empire, and as a result, she would start living a normal life again. However, all the miracles that usually happened in fairy tales no longer visited her life as before. Only after 5 years of her imprisonment, she was finally able to accept the fact that everyone had abandoned her, and now she has become an abandoned crow, even in a cage. Although she was considered abandoned, she was still watched over, whose duties included the fact that they had to check every cell with a convict. Today's lineup of supervisors included a girl who thought that a joke with bread, and on the part of the second one on the viewer, was inappropriate, and not at all necessary. She was a newcomer and did not know the history of the defendants at all, which is why the other guards decided to tell her that the prisoner Charlotte was a thief who tried to kill the empress. The bread that Charlotte was to eat was not ordinary, and she was to die from it. Such a death, in the opinion of the newcomer, was simply terrible. But her colleague, in response to this, drew attention to the previous words of the emperor. The content, which was that the girl who was on the other side of the cell and held the poisoned bread in her hands, was to die while imprisoned. It was too dangerous to leave such a powerful force that was no longer needed by the emperor. Hearing similar words from the audience, the girl refused to accept her death, being a prisoner. She promised that she would definitely leave this place and punish everyone who was involved in her imprisonment. The most important thing for her right now was to create a plan, because she was in an ice prison in the north, in a tunnel that was deeper than the bottom of a deep vertical cave. It was so cold in this cave that she could not lean her back against the walls, because they were covered with ice. The girl was also stopped from the surface of the earth by her broken legs, which she could not even move. All of Charlotte's efforts to restore the aura in her body were stopped by the fact that it could no longer circulate in her body, only under the condition that if she could receive the aura from someone else, even for a while, but she would be able to leave the ice prison and be free like a bird. However, such conditions were completely impossible because she fully understood her situation and was sure that such a chance would never come in her life. Greeting his glow, one of the guards was surprised by the man's unexpected visit to their icy prison. Turning to one of the servants of the prison, he asked the man if he had heard the news about the death of Archduke Richt. Continuing in her cell, Charlotte turned her attention to hearing this voice for the first time, which grew louder with each step. Her attention was also drawn to the fact that this person was wearing shoes, which led her to think that someone outside had come to the prison. The man, who was Count Keitelt, remarked that although the cause of the Archduke's death was a blockage of blood vessels, he was still scared, because there was a thief who killed the royal family. However, the attendant reported that the Count did not even think about the excitement. Because the same girl was under strict arrest, they would not even be able to move their legs. When he stood in front of Charlotte, he asked her if she really was this famous thief. Looking deep into her eyes, the boy said that she had a charming look for a person who had been imprisoned for a long time. Everything that finds something behind Count Keitli, the prison officer informed that he should leave the girl's cell because he saw her face. Not even having time to say a word to the guest, Richard pulled Charlotte into a kiss. He explained his inappropriate, insolent, and audacious behavior by the fact that he wanted to check the presence of something strange in the thief's mouth. Addressing the same man, the girl noted that his actions were terrible and called him a real dog. However, he, looking back at her for the last time before leaving, remarked that she should think carefully about the situation and pay attention to who in her is more like a dog. And observing all the events that unfolded during the arrival of one of the supervisors, he noticed that even though the visitor was the son of Archduke Richti, the employee could have serious problems. Following all the conversations she had heard over the past 5 years, Charlotte learned of the Archduke's recent death. The same Archduke was a representative of the hereditary Nordic nation and a relative of the imperial family on the paternal line, as well as the father of his only daughter. Turning his attention to his palm in front of the girl, a very weak stream of aura appeared, which she was infinitely happy about. Meanwhile, one of the guards, accompanied by his colleague, went to the Charlotte prison with a bucket of ice water. When the newcomer asked what the purpose of this bucket was, the man answered that the prisoners should take a bath, and he was the kindest among the other prison employees. To all his assistant's remarks that ice water in a rather chilly area was not the best idea, he informed her that this water had the purpose of washing away all the sins of this thief. But by the time they reached the very cell to which they had led the way before her, they had to see a freed Charlotte standing on her own 2 feet. She greeted the prison staff with a warm smile on her face from the emotion she experienced as a result of her long-held dream finally coming true. She was sure that the man who came to her shared the aura with her. Although she understood his motives, it was unimportant to her. As she had promised, as soon as the shackles left her wrists, she began her revenge on all her offenders, starting with the warden himself. All of her strength and a small part of her aura went into leaving the confines of the ice prison in any way, because she could not hold only a small particle for so long. The ice crystals were no longer felt under her finger, because she saw no obstacles in front of her, but only a bright light, and which had been out of her eyes for more than a year. In a moment, she felt a cool stream of wind on her skin, along with pleasant snow crystals that were falling on her face bit by bit directly from the sky. It was the aura that helped her bring her legs back to consciousness and make them work. But due to a very small amount of aura, as well as time, the girl gradually began to notice the disappearance of that painless effect. Even patiently, the unbearable pain from the last forces that were already running out, she continued to move little by little through the snow. This situation was also witnessed by an unexpected guest of the prison who heard from Charlotte's lips that she cannot die until she takes revenge on all her offenders. Kate stood in the way of freedom, who once again commented on the charming look and with whom Charlotte probably moved towards her desire to live. Deciding not to interrupt him, the girl listened to another comment in her direction about the fact that he was beginning to understand his stepmother. Such words reminded the girl of the story she once heard. Archduke Risht indeed had only one natural daughter, but besides her, he also had one adopted son. It was this son, named Richard, who stood before her as his own person. He reported that his foster mother has now given him the proper status, and he is now Count Keitel. But the girl was not interested in his story because she wanted to know the purpose of her liberation, or rather help, but the only thing Count Keitel longed for was the death of the emperor, which sounded comforting to Charlotte's ears. Their carriage sped off in an unknown direction, quietly shattering the crystal particles of snow under its wheels. Richard wanted to know from his companion if she knew of the existence of some small kingdom of Iphigenia, about which there were many rumors, and some said that the former emperor so desired immortality that he crushed this small kingdom in his quest. Looking at the snow-covered landscape from her window, the girl, even without the help of her companion, became clear that their journey ended precisely within this amazing area. When Richard announced that they had finally arrived at an interesting building, a rather tall mansion, made in a snowy style, appeared in front of the girl. Before leaving the carriage, the girl reported her inability to move freely with her own legs, to which the Count replied that he would help her by holding her hand. Looking at the snow that was continuously falling from the sky, the girl was interested in why the boy had chosen this place. He wasn't going to hide anything from her. He even replied that they came to this place in order to bewitch Charlotte with immortality charms. Iphigenia is a mysterious land of magic. There were many rumors that it was there that one could find the desired immortality thanks to the magic that came from the royal family. All rumors about this were refuted by the fall of the nation as a result of the reckless actions of the former Emperor George. But unexpectedly, a fairly serious man denied the fact that the girl was untruthful, which led her to completely different assumptions. She assumed that all the rumors about this small kingdom were true, which the Count confirmed. The former emperor tried to get rid of all members of the royal family of Iphigenia, starting a war with this kingdom, but fortunately, the pregnant queen managed to escape. After the queen fled her own lands, Archduchess Rirt rescued her when the woman was lost in the snowy mountains, nearly dead. Not believing what was said, the girl was surprised that the Archduchess saved Queen Iphigenia, but the Count continued his speech. He reported that the Duchess had died recently, but by all accounts it looked more like murder than an unexpected death. Richard's sister inherited the title of Duchess, but all that was too young and in the north not strong enough to protect her. Even with sufficient forces, and from the north, there was such a powerful force that Charlotte had. And in addition to her so powerful and magical death, there was also the magic of immortality, which she would be able to reincarnate. Rebirth was not too simple, but for it they both needed a body. Wiping away the tears that suddenly appeared on her face, Charlotte continued to state that she did not believe in such a thing. She was sure that if this magic really existed, then the Emperor was alive. In addition, she wondered who exactly the girl she was supposed to be reincarnated into was, and stemming from that question, she wondered if she was something of a sacrifice. This caused her indignation, and she asked the Count to reconsider his decision and find a way out of the situation that would not be so crazy. After carefully listening to all the questions and requests from Charlotte, Richard began to answer her questions a little, starting with the fact that Emperor George was really dead, because the existence of magic was a secret. He continued to say that the girl in front of them was nothing like a sacrifice. He went on to explain that Iphigenia's magic of immortality only released a person's aura or soul, moving it into another shell. Having decided not to wait any longer, the man said that he should introduce himself officially, and it was through this presentation that he was reincarnated as Richard Serge Iphigenia, the last representative of the royal family, and at the same time the same son of the queen. Falling to her feet, Charlotte asked her interlocutor if he really wanted to restore the entire empire, but he replied that they both would not have enough time for such revenge. Only the one who saved his mother came into his plans. Mysterious and magical art, which challenged the entire laws of the worldview, opened the desired door to revenge for them. But even with all this, the final decision must be made by Charlotte, because she could not leave two sides at once, staying on the side of her abuser, the emperor, and the injured count, originally from a small kingdom. However, the girl herself did not even think to hesitate, because the thirst for revenge burned in her veins. She promised to get rid of Albert and his 4 henchmen. Charlotte wasted a lot of time holding the sword in her hands, faithfully serving her star, but she also lost no less time when she paid for her too powerful loyalty. She promised to take their lives in exchange for the time they took from her. Throwing out similar words in Richard's presence, the man couldn't help but notice how powerful the girl's willpower was, how lucky they both were to have magic in their assistance. In response to the question about the death, the boy could not guarantee the fact that the girl would remain alive, but reported that she was not too worried because he was putting his life in the same danger as her. In order for the magic to work, the girl only had to close her eyes, and when she opened them, she would be in another body. Leaning a little closer, Richard again pulled his interlocutor into a kiss full of magic. During the journey between the soul and the body, the girl was overwhelmed by someone's memories. In a moment, she found herself in an unknown room, observing the mind of the maid and her master. The same girl, in whose body Charlotte was reincarnated, turned to her husband, reporting that her ladyship had died in a completely unnatural way. The man asked not to climb. The girl is not in his business, because in this way she puts her life in danger, and no stubbornness can be avoided here. Even despite all the warnings, the maid continued to assert that she could not leave the cause of her ladyship, because if it were not for her, the girl would have been swallowed up by an abyss of despair. She was ready, and what for her, if not for everything, although she really hated her face and body. Soon, it was after the blonde said those words that Charlotte realized she was in her memories. The rest of these memories passed in a flash, and she woke up already in her new body, looking around. Her memory did not miss the room in which the girl was staying right now, because in her head she had the impression that she was in this room for the first time. However, she understood the only thing during her stay within those memories, namely, that the body she inhabited was in the residence of the Richt family. Although she had no idea about her new personality, her new body, which still remembered its personal mistress named Zuzu, told her about it with joy. Her lonely situation was shattered by Richard entering the room, informing her that the girl uses her aura intuitively. Continuing to walk towards her, he decided to tell some fact about Zuzu's body. Her death came after she accidentally drank poison to fake her own death. However, after Charlotte's soul entered Zuzu's body, the poison magically disappeared and treatment was no longer needed. She was grateful that Richard had saved her, but since they had similar goals, she probably shouldn't have thanked him. But in reality, she did not know how best to address him, because now she had to play the role of a servant. To avoid all unnecessary questions and rather go to the implementation of the plan of their revenge, the girl got up from the bed, turning to her husband with a question about the content of the plan itself. However, the conditions for the implementation of his plan were quite specific, and the first thing the girl had to do was become his lover. Zuzu was an ordinary servant, so he let it slip that under the condition that if they declared themselves as an official couple, then it would be the easiest way to work together. Although it was a bit strange, it was quite a logical idea for Charlotte, who was currently playing the role of Zuzu, but she could not refuse. She asked Richard a question about age that surprised him, but the answer still came from him. Hearing that the boy was currently 22, she thought about the fact that Ephenia had collapsed exactly 22 years ago, which confirmed his involvement in the royal family. In fact, the girl's thoughts weren't filled with thoughts about the boy's age so much as thoughts about his inexperience that piqued her interest. He wanted to hear from the girl if that was a problem, as such a solution was the first and best thing that crossed his mind. However, she didn't mind, because Richard had an explanation for his excuse that it really was the best way, and Charlotte didn't object to it. Zuzu's death came after she drank poisonous tea right in front of the Grand Duchess. However, she was not so sudden, and it was because of this that they could make up a legend that Earl Keatle cared for her, and did not notice how his feelings had become so deep. Without hesitation, Charlotte immediately agreed to follow this legend, which directly confirmed her agreement to officially confirm their couple. Before leaving the room, the boy announced that he would call his maids to help his companion get ready. Also, before his departure, he expressed his sincere hopes that she would cope with her role well, but Charlotte herself did not like such a statement. She noted that she wasn't one to whom the words were empty, pointing at another visitor to the room, causing him to look surprised. Grabbing her interlocutor, the girl claimed that their union should be confirmed not only verbally, but also really make everyone believe in it. Her attention was fixed on the bed, which the couple had left in a complete mess, to generate many rumors. Charlotte asked Richard for a kiss that would cause the bed to be unmade. He immediately understood the train of thought of his companion, so he simply could not refuse such a logical proposal. Lugging her into a kiss, he made the girl feel the same emotions she had felt during the 2 previous kisses, mostly negative ones. One of the remaining maids sent by Richard was very surprised at her colleague's sudden recovery, but she was much more surprised that she was able to find Zuzu in the Earl's bedchamber. However, Charlotte herself was more worried about the fact that she was still not used to playing the role of Zuzu, and even more not used to her new appearance. Looking around herself a little from head to toe, the girl perfectly understood that Zuzu was also as lucky as she was, and her life was not entirely easy either. She knew that Zuzu was born in a small settlement in the south, but lost her parents at a very early age, which is why she also moved in with them. She worked in the residence of nobles, then she was threatened because of her appearance. About 3 years have passed since Zuzu was saved by the Grand Duchess, but the same girl did not give up her hands and continued to hold fast. The girl was still taken out of her thoughts by the maid, who too carelessly held the comb in her hands, as a result of which she pulled her luxurious white hair too hard on herself. In her excuse, she gave the reason that, following the order of the Count, she went too far with the work that he had entrusted to her personally. But watching the ardent and at the same time threatening look from Zuzu's blue, like crystal eyes, the girl with a nervous smile leaned on a low-quality comb. Observing a similar reaction to all actions on her part, Charlotte understood that the senior maid Linda, who was behind her, still did not understand anything, although she was jealous of Zuzu during all their joint work. In a moment, once again, hearing that the main problem was the comb, the girl couldn't wait any longer and snatched it from the hand of the senior maid. Approaching a little closer to her interlocutor, the girl seemed to ask a rhetorical question, asserting that Linda has no flaws and is an ideal person. Without even making any effort, the girl instantly broke that unfortunate comb into 2 parts, with the same unchanging emotion. Linda decided that her former colleague had decided to intimidate her with his own power, but she had no idea why. In the girl's past life, everyone behaved as if they did not pay attention to her and considered her an empty place. But Charlotte, having a character, was not going to repeat the previous actions. Having decided to clarify one more point, the girl bared her shoulder, revealing to her interlocutor a view of the place to which the Count treated with great love. Such a gesture caused exactly the emotions on Linda's face that Charlotte wanted to see. She had to have proof of all claims and proof of her status. Although at that moment the Count was not at all interested in building relationships with women, but judging by everything, he could not resist the charming beauty of Zuzu. Charlotte's facial expression was not so easy when remembering what the meaning of this mark was. Linda apologized to Zuzu, finally realizing her current situation. Taking her place again in front of the mirror, Charlotte decided to question whether the head maid was really fully aware of the relationship Zuzu currently had with the Count, to which she replied with a rather excited face that she would do everything in her power to find suitable outfits for Richard's new companion. Charlotte was even glad that the maid believed in the class system, which greatly helped her and Richard to confirm all their intentions. Suddenly, a servant entered young Mr. Richard's workplace and offered him tea. Butler Simon, who used to be Queen Ephania's personal knight, now became her son's servant. Richard was surprised by the fact that despite his rather mature age, he was still considered a young gentleman. He thanked the butler for the tea and informed him that word would soon come from the ice prison that Charlotte Morden had died while trying to escape. However, he also informed her that her body was in a suitable place, and the butler was to keep some letter with him before sending it to the capital. Interrogating the young gentleman, Simon wanted to know if the boy had any suspicious signals from the thief. However, Richard said that a man should not address Charlotte in this way, because they still had something in common. After he decided to implement his plan and take revenge on the Emperor, the boy decided to contact Charlotte. All searches for information led to the fact that she was completely dependent on what was said about her, namely, that she never killed unnecessarily and received no reward in exchange for her services. Analyzing all the information he had gathered about the girl, this kind of behavior was typical of loyalty. Thinking about all his plans was interrupted by the butler, who suddenly announced that he had received some strange rumors. Simone meant, After which he replied that Richard should not hide the current situation with one of the maids. Against all odds, Richard couldn't even miss that the rumors were spreading. At this rate, however, he was satisfied with his work, letting the man know he had everything under control. The butler was pleased to hear that the boy could assess the situation without succumbing to the charms of the maid. He chose Linda herself for this task, and because she was the kind of person who, when humiliated, made everyone around her feel like her, she was the perfect fit for her role as a disseminator. But suddenly all his thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, which announced that his companion was completely ready. Charlotte entered the room softly with a warm smile, announcing that the services of the servant whom Richard had sent to her had been well used. The next step in their plan was for all the house servants to know about their relationship, and seeing as topics like this weren't brought up very often, the news quickly spread throughout the building. Linda told the other maid that Zuzu had changed a lot after she drank the poison, but her interlocutor claimed that this was predictable since the Earl was currently her supporter. However, they also talked about how sorry they were for Lady Dorothy. The earldom's heirloom and precious maid were stolen by her brother, picked up off the street. Moving Richard around as a child, he remembered his stepmother telling him about the day she first met his mother. The woman in front of him explained that during their first meeting, small snowflakes also fell from the sky. But apart from the first meeting, the same day Queen Euphenia got lost in the snowy mountains, she wondered why the Duchess didn't get rid of her. But the woman said that at that time they found themselves in a situation where they lost their younger brother, and the fiefdom was chosen as a supply point during the war. However, even based on this story, little Richard still did not understand the reasons for his mother's preserved life. In fact, the reasons for saving Richard's mother were due to ordinary morality. But apart from them, she also liked the sight of a determined woman trying to survive. But even after hearing the answer to the question, the boy was still not sure of the truth of this answer. Touching Richard's dark hair, the woman asked him if his appearance had been changed under the influence of Valentina's magic, to which he replied in the affirmative and revealed that she had been haunting him since he became the son of the Earl of Keighley. Addressing the boy, the woman promised that, despite all the obstacles, she would take full responsibility for his upbringing until he grew up, because in addition to saving Richard, they could also save their daughter Dorothy in case something happened to the woman herself. Communicating with his subordinates, he resolved the issue of the budget and the rest that was connected with it, and promised to take some points into his attention during his stay in the capital. Standing aside, Charlotte watched the view from the balcony, thinking of the busyness that had enveloped the Earl since morning. According to all her observations, she could come to the conclusion that Count Richard copes well with his responsibilities, starting with the organization's budget planning, inheritance, and ending with personnel corrections. Due to his presence, the atmosphere in the residence was much calmer compared to those times after the death of Duchess Richt. Returning to planning all their next actions, the girl took a seat across from Richard in his office. In response to this, the boy said that before starting their actions, they should visit the capital. Recently, there have been quite a few natural disasters in the east of the empire. As a result, all farms began to go bankrupt, which led to mass migration. But even despite such a situation, the authorities of the same East only watched the development of events, except for the Grand Duchess Anneliese Richt. She found work for the migrants who most often gathered in the district, and also developed cultural lands in the same way. But besides that, she also led expeditions in the ruined land of Euphenia, thus raising her authority. Albert, in turn, behaved too carelessly when he ascended the throne, and was repeatedly referred to as a prince who had abandoned his morals. Albert argued that the East was abusing its power, which is why he continued to send investigators to investigate. But besides that, he took small mistakes in keeping the books as capital crimes. Sometime after the Grand Duchess went for a walk with the horses on the way back to her estate, she suddenly collapsed. Albert was characteristic of this kind of elimination of all unwanted faces in his path. He always persecuted people for no reason and found their weaknesses, after which he got rid of them. When he came face to face with his foster mother, he could tell that her energy was in complete disarray, which was too similar to using a poison that was damaging the energy source. But when he thought about this assumption, he immediately came to the conclusion that the person who did this was someone from the residence. However, he did not have strong evidence for excuses to prove guilt. That's why when he sent Zuzu into a state of staged death, he used the same effect of the poison. This was done so that when that criminal saw the effect of the same poison, he would begin to think that there was another traitor in the residence besides him. But, according to this reason, he will begin to worry that traitors, besides him, want to get rid of him. Under the influence of reflection, whoever could take the position of a traitor, he will also lose the ability to think rationally due to a clouded mind. Having called out to Zuzu, Richard still did not stop thinking about his whole plan, which he had kept in his head for a considerable amount of time. He invited the girl to dinner, informing her that their next meeting would take place during her time. Unfortunately, the girl could not know exactly what the Count was talking about at this time, although she desperately wanted to know about all his plans. Over that dinner, their conversation was about the usual details they wanted to know from each other, which included wanting to know all the ways to amuse their significant other. The girl admitted that besides dancing, reading, playing chess, and cards, she liked almost everything, including a plate of mushrooms and butter, which was located on their table. Of course, this attention to details of his companion was only for show, and in front of the head maid, Richard should have really shown his interest in Zuzu. However, as the maid left their company, his face was instantly different from what it had been a moment ago. Looking at the dish in front of her, towards which, according to her, the girl felt somewhat positive emotions, she was reminded of the past. This dish transported her back to her childhood, when she remembered that it was the Emperor's favorite, and because she did not want to be different from him in any way, she forced herself to meet all the demands that Albert required of her. Thus, everything she liked as a star was given to her through excessive force, and she wondered what her former comrades thought about it. She wondered if they considered her a real person, or a mere appendage to the Emperor. That must have been the reason they hurt her, though she couldn't know for sure. Even outside of prison, Charlotte still wanted to be free. And their plans with Richard were quite similar, but she wanted revenge not only on the Emperor. Suddenly, from her thoughts about revenge and the desire to get out, Richard himself interrupted, asking the girl if she knew what was behind the jam in front of her. However, not hearing any answer, except surprise at the unexpected question, the boy decided to take the explanation upon himself and presented her with rowan jam, which was brought out in the north. The boy claimed that this jam was not ordinary, but it had sedative effects, which the girl thought was interesting, and Richard's behavior seemed like he was trying to elevate himself as a groom. Adding just 1 teaspoon of jam to her warm drink, Charlotte took a small sip, keeping the boy's caring gaze on her. In a moment, her expectations were not fulfilled, because the effect of the tea was truly amazing. A rather weak aroma and a slight bitterness made the girl cross the limits of the thirst for revenge. Seeing that Charlotte was calm and completely ready to talk, the player asked her if she really had the pleasure of visiting the north. The girl confirmed her admiration for the amazing scenery of white snow, and thanked her interlocutor for telling her about such a wonder of the world. Suddenly, behind the girl, behind the door, a familiar voice rang out, asking if she really liked to talk during meals. The same Lady Dorothy suddenly appeared in front of her, who looked not quite satisfied. Turning to his younger sister, Richard noted that her appearance in the Hall of Vows was quite unexpected. Then, in a moment, the boyfriend of the younger, whether her dream was sweet. Dorothy, still with an expression of satisfaction on her face, announced that she had come out of her room, although she felt rather tense, for the reason that by looking at everything, people had forgotten who was real in their family. Even though Richard was the eldest child in the Richt family, Dorothy was the only legal heir of their family. However, she was only 16 years old, and she was very ill, so in a similar situation, the government of the county passed into the hands of her adopted son Richard. Turning to his sister, the boy assured her that although she treated such a thing with great responsibility, she should rest more before she legally inherited her title when she reached the right age. The girl considered it unfair that her brother, only a few years older than her, took upon himself the right to take the place of the Grand Duchess, acting as if he represented the head of the family. Turning to Richard, she reported that she had learned about all his plans from the doctor whom he tried to bribe. She knew that he was the one who sent her that teapot and tried to poison her, thinking that the Richt residence would pass into his hands. She didn't want to see him at that table anymore and demanded that he leave her sight. But not even wanting to waste his strength to put even a mask of displeasure on his face, he turned to the servants, ordering them to send the lady to her room, sleeping the terrible paranoia that arose as a result of her mother's death. All those present were shocked by the unexpected statement, and from Richard's side, which also shocked Dorothy herself. Zuzu, and putting her on his lap, he announced that he was still going to the capital for a few days, so her demands to get away had to be fulfilled. Watching what was happening before her eyes, the rightful heiress of the county did not understand what was happening at all. Most likely, the rumors of his unexpected affair with one of the maids had not yet reached the ears of Richard's sister, so the recent action seemed too unexpected for her. When Zozu was poisoned with an extremely dangerous poison, Dorothy was next to her. The girl shed great drops of her tears, begged the servant to remain conscious, while Zozu repeated endlessly in her thoughts that the lady was to live a long and happy life, but without her participation. Turning to her brother, Dorothy still could not understand the situation that arose right in front of her. It seemed that the sister still did not know all the details, so the boy asked Simon to explain everything to her. The man reported that one prisoner froze to death while trying to escape from the icy prison a few days ago. Considering the death of the guards, the damage was really serious. Thinking about all the facts that the butler had just informed, the girl assumed that only the thief Charlotte could have caused so many problems. Although the ice prison is located in the lands ruled by His Highness, that area also belongs to the northern part of the empire. It is in order to deal with all the consequences and report to the authorities that Richard has to go to the capital. For Dorothy, the reason for her brother's departure was completely unimportant, because she was more interested in why he needed Zuzu in his company, to which he, continuing to hold his companion in his rather loose arms, claimed that he was doing it because he wanted to. Deciding to go along with this little show, put on especially for Dorothy and the servants, Charlotte touched his palm, claiming that he had promised to make her the most powerful woman in the empire. Watching this whole scene, the Grand Duchess was completely speechless towards her close friend, feeling only sadness, anger, irritation, and disappointment. Continuing to get into her role, Charlotte couldn't stop herself as she continued to state that she was unsure of her desire to reject the Earl, as he showed her extraordinary love for her every night. This was enough to convince Dorothy of her avowed reluctance to contact these two. Watching the girl leave their company with a rather loud comment, even Charlotte felt awkward, and not the most pleasant situation. She didn't understand why she still had memories of Zuzu, but even without taking care of Dorothy in her practice, the girl still felt a little sad. Observing all the rumors in the manor, the Charlottes knew that after Dorothy left their company, she locked herself in her room for a long time and cried loudly. Charlotte asked Richard if he wished his sister to remain out of the Emperor's sight, but first of all, warned that she was of no interest to him as long as the power was in the hands of the Earl himself. But the most important thing was whether Richard was really ready to put up with her open hatred. As far as Dorothy, who was only a child who was ordered to look after the boy by his adoptive mother, he was ready to take responsibility for all the mistakes of the Duchy of Risht on his shoulders. Suddenly, before the Earl and his companion got into the carriage, an unnamed person approached Richard himself, apologizing for his interference, but he wished to speak his request. The request that this boy could accompany the Earl passed like lightning in Charlotte's mind. He explained his request by the fact that he would like to see the imperial palace before he leaves life, and no matter how many times he thinks about it, this trip seems to him to be a great chance. After Dorothy interrogates the bribed doctor, the truth begins to emerge little by little, even before they head to the capital. After the death of the Duchess, Richard began to behave as if the power was only in his hands, and in addition, he pretended that he wanted to poison Dorothy as well. If that were true, then he could most likely find the culprit and make him believe that he was involved, because Charlotte was sure that the murderer would show himself very soon. At the unnamed boy's request, Richard refused him, because the road was long enough, and they might have difficulties if more people went on this journey. But even anticipating all the troubles that could happen during the journey, the boy still begged the Count to take him on his journey, promising that he would be useful to them in any way. After hearing the latter, Richard nevertheless agreed to take the boy on a trip, already assuming what exactly he would need his help with. Already in the carriage, which was moving rather quickly, Richard the Weiss began the conversation, announcing that as soon as the murderer realized that he was not alone among the whole county, then he would reveal himself. Also, it was not necessary to exclude possible developments in the form of a conspiracy with the first killer, or an ordinary escape, or both of these options. In any case, their main goal was not to identify this killer because they were planning to attack someone bigger. The plan was to begin when the carriage crossed Mount Quent, after which the veil of revenge would be opened and there would be no turning back. Presenting himself to a table full of his henchmen, the Emperor had some important information directly for them. Although he was among the first to learn of Charlotte's death, he was among those to whom this information was available. The information spread among all the members of the table, whom Charlotte had previously considered her close friends, caused them to be surprised. However, Albert reported that he had given orders to send her to the capital to see her one last time. One of those present rose from his seat, addressing the emperor and asking him if he was going to hold the ceremony in the capital. Another guild member, Irene, also joined in the conversation, suggesting that Albert was going to restore her reputation and dismiss all the accusations against her, which she thought were too frivolous. Guild Minister Dartrick agreed with Irene's statement, reporting that the likelihood of a misunderstanding with the imperial family would be too great. Marshal of the Ground Forces. Pascalina did not comment on the statement of their head in any way, but noted that it was he who gave the order that they themselves had to carry out. For Archbishop Jonathan, the most important thing was that he lost the opportunity to speak, not to end up in the same position as Charlotte during the sermons, when he had nothing to say. Disrespectful of his decision, the emperor remarked that all members of his guild at least show respect for their former comrade. Sensing the dead silence that hung between all the members of the guild, Irene spoke to the entire table, who was curious to know the cause of Charlotte's death. Although they didn't know for sure, some said she was found dead in the snow after she committed a crime spree during which she killed the guards. However, among those who used it was one supervisor, who was considered a novice, so he did not know anything about this situation. And due to quite shocking events, he was left without some memories. The entire guild, knowing that Charlotte had an extraordinary power in her hands, they all wanted to improve on the fact that she would not be able to get the power, which is why they decided to act first. But looking back on his memories, Albert always remembered how outspoken she was. She had been their friend with whom they had shared their joys and sorrows ever since they had been in the lands of Morn. Even knowing perfectly well how exactly their order would end in the form of her imprisonment, they still could not believe that her life was cut short just because she could not cope with the cold of the northern mountains. Irene did not believe in the real death of Charlotte, because no matter what, the Charlotte they knew would surely have coped with such an ordeal. Empress Batilda was from a wealthy family that had sent consorts to leaders for generations, which was why they had no choice but to order the culprit to harm the empress. Dartrick was very sorry that Charlotte could not take part in the elimination of the Grand Duchess Richt, because if she had taken it up, they could have managed the duchy in peace for now. Since it was no longer possible to bring Charlotte back to life, the question among all the guild members was what exactly they should do with her in the end. Under the influence of everyone present at this table, the emperor bowed his head for a moment, considering his further decision. Lifting his head and looking at the center of the table, Albert announced that the girl's reputation would not be restored due to multiple murders. Finally informed of his final decision, the emperor left his seat, informing his guilds that when Charlotte's body arrived in the capital, they were to hold an inquest and a closed funeral. Pascalina reported that Charlotte's relatives will not be able to bring her body because she is an orphan. This topic was also picked up by Irene, who reported that they were the only loved ones of the girl after all. As he said goodbye to Albert, Jonathan asked the emperor to let him know when Charlotte's body would be brought back, as he planned to vacate the temple for a quiet funeral. On the way from the room, Albert was accompanied by Dartrish. Hearing the question from the man behind him, the emperor replied that it was indeed the end, but he should rest for a while. However, before the emperor left his company, Dartrick informed them that there was something left in their plans for the day, due to the poison that had poisoned Duchess Richt. However, before he even had time to tell what exactly this topic was about, the door that was right in front of the guild minister slammed shut. When the man was left behind, the voice of Irene began behind him, who claimed that Albert had completely lost his senses when he became emperor. Even though there were uneasy feelings in his soul, he could not delay taking measures to strengthen his power, since he was still the emperor. As far as he could remember, he had been told that the heir to their earldom would be coming from the north to visit the capital. Judging from all that Albert had in his knowledge, he surmised that the son of the Earl of Keetle, who had been born illegitimate, had decided to make his move in order to take the place of the Grand Duchess. The emperor's thoughts also included the fact that the new earl was another boy who was greedy for power, and it would be easy to remove him from his path. With rather grandiose intentions, he planned that when the Earl of Keetle arrived in the capital, Albert would ask what the weather was like on the day Charlotte died, hoping it wasn't too cold. Quickly overcoming the obstacle in her path without even thinking about it too much, Charlotte's thoughts were filled with Albert. I found it strange that she suddenly remembered Albert's face, relating it to her recent nightmare. When Richard appeared in front of her, he noticed that his ally looked quite tired. However, she assured that it was due to energy that had not yet fully recovered, and it was for this reason that the new body still could not handle the aura. In a moment, Charlotte wished to change the subject to a more interesting and useful one, asking Richard what he had learned from that rascal. The boy learned that the scoundrel confessed his desire for wealth, which is why he poisoned the great countess's riding gloves. He described his supplier of the poison as a man in a strange mouse mask, who, as it turned out later, was part of the emperor's immortals. From the beginning, Charlotte was at the head of this organization, but when Albert accepted his title of emperor, he announced that he was to receive an official position, and this organization will become one of the palace divisions. It was the first time she had seen anything so good go through the skin for a source of energy, so she missed that this poison must be refined, because in confirmation of this, there is a powerful effectiveness that was able to be verified by the quick death of the Duchess. In addition, she also suggested that they try to use it next time as well, but first they should go east to the same city. But in order to get to that city, they must first visit the port of Oberhofen. Most of the new, extremely expensive, easy entertainments are brought here from the east and distributed among the people. The girls asked that before she was imprisoned, one of her old acquaintances, a former doctor, lived in this area, but she did not know if he still lives here. Going to answer these words, the Count assumed that Charlotte was going to find out the origin of the poison with the help of this doctor, but she agreed to report that they were going to hire her to take care of the girls. Charlotte had a great desire to visit the imperial palace, and without even thinking about destroying everyone who was there. However, she understood that she would not be able to cope with everything at once. Moreover, in some sense, she had a hand in the death of the Duchess by helping Albert become emperor in the past. Unfortunately, Charlotte could not see into the future, so she must always be on the lookout. She should not so easily lose all that she should have received as a result of getting rid of the emperor and all his henchmen, taking everything from them. The statement that she wanted to see Albert's face when he found out who exactly was responsible for the attack on him brought a big smile to Richard's face. After some time, their carriage stopped, and the news reached their ears that they had arrived at their destination. Calling Charlotte behind her back, Richard announced that he was in the capital for the first time. Therefore, I thought a lot about which method should be chosen in order for it to become the most successful. However, he predicted that Charlotte was far from the kind of people who really planned their evil deeds. Watching how the Count finished all the desired words, some disappointment appeared on the girl's face. She turned away from him, telling him that what she hated the most was 2-year-olds who acted like they knew everything about life. As she entered the room, Charlotte thought that Richard didn't really look like an immature child. However, he made a decision that led to the fact that many rumors appeared around them. All they talked about was that Count Keitel liked to spend his time with the maids. One could even miss that they thought this stop was motivated by entertainment rather than a serious visit to the capital. It would be better if such rumors spread further, because even if they flood the entire empire, Richard will still have nothing to lose. Charlotte was brought out of her thoughts by the voice of the boy who was her ally, asking her if she was okay, as judging by her appearance, it could be concluded that she was excited about something. Such a visit from Richard was really unexpected for her, because lost in her thoughts, she did not notice what was happening around her at all. Looking away from the girl, the boy asked her how she was going to find the doctor she mentioned earlier. The girl herself said that she had already made an appointment at sunset, because they knew very well that the doctor liked to work at night. Offering the boy to take a seat next to him, based on the fact that he did not know what might happen next, the girl also reported that he must have been quite tired. However, observing the lack of reaction to her proposal, the girl had other guesses. Turning to Richard, she asked him if he was trying to sneak a peek beyond the boundaries, but he denied it, based on his lack of interest in such a thing. As Charlotte had assumed earlier, the boy in front of her was still very young. If he still decided to play the role of the girl's lover, he should have at least taken such jokes more lightly. Realizing that the girl had problems with her legs in the past, Count Keitel decided to offer her a massage, which she carefully refused, saying that she does not feel tired at all in the personality associated with her legs. Although the two of them were currently in the port market, on the contrary, Richard had a bad feeling. No wonder the coachman refused to call him. It was clear that the locals like to trade in the prohibited goods that they transport through the port. Relying on the fact that in this market one could find not only goods, but also people, The boy assumed that it was there, at this time of day, that they would be able to find Charlotte's friend. The girl's message contained words that her memories predicted the location of this girl, so she knew him with precision. Entering one of the market premises, Charlotte and Richard saw a man in front of them who asked them who they were. The girl did not come to talk to him, so they quickly informed him that he knew very well that he was not the owner of this place, and to just tell them where the doctor was. Even with the blade so close to his mount, he still continued to bark at Charlotte, telling her she'd better watch her words. Since the man was not going to tell them where he was and who they were looking for, the girl asked him to give her only a message that pointed to the first prince's mushroom soup. However, she was interrupted by a voice from the other side of the room. The same doctor said that she had heard everything, but did not need to repeat it, asking the girl to put the knife on the ground. Turning to the girl herself and the young man who was behind her, the doctor wanted to clarify exactly what kind of relationship they were in. Charlotte's first meeting with the doctor took place during the reign of the former emperor, when the woman provided the girl with samples of mushroom characteristics. The woman had a rather childish idea of a girl who was one of Albert's 13 closest advisors. Their conversation started with a question from Charlotte about how to distinguish edible mushrooms from inedible ones. A little later, she heard rumors of the unexpected death of the first prince, but that too was just one of those stories. The woman was present during the destruction of Charlotte's entire family, so she had the opportunity to speak with her as well. She decided not to hide the true purpose of her visit, but she still had something for the girl. A little on the head closer to her, she specified exactly what she wanted to tell her, but her sight fell on the confused and blank look of Charlotte, chained to the trunk. Her heart sank when she saw this picture, and after a moment she made the decision not to associate with it anymore, causing her to leave the capital and cross to the port of Oberhofen. Addressing Charlotte, who was actually hidden under the face and body of Zuzu, the woman remarked that only the girl she knew had information about the cause of the first prince's death, and also about the location of the doctor, so the woman was interested in what kind of relationship they were in. Now, addressing the man behind her, Charlotte informed him that he could be free. Little by little, starting to remove the hood from her head, the girl named the last words that the doctor had spoken during their last meeting. The content of these words was that they were the words left by Viscountess Morn as her report. Hearing her name from the girl, Angela, who was a doctor, was completely confused because the information about the report, along with her name, was not available to everyone. Of course, the girl could talk about the magic of eternal life, but she still decided to tell that all Charlotte's memories were magically transferred to her body, which was on the verge of death. For Angela, such words seemed like something like a ritual in the temple, but the girl herself reported that the woman had better be happy because she wanted to make an agreement with her, telling her his intentions to destroy the entire capital together with the overthrow of the emperor. Realizing that Angela's life from one place to another did not seem sweet at all, so the girl said that the woman could find her if she made the right decision. After all she needed was to contact Count Katelu, after which they can guarantee her complete safety and security. But aside from making a deal, Charlotte also had one more question for Angela in the form of whether or not she knew about the new poison that was spreading across the empire. Already outside the doctor's building, Richard turned to his companion, asking her if the girl really needed her help, on the condition that she risked revealing her identity. Asking her interlocutor how the emperor knew about such a place, the girl implied that he would not pay much attention to it. If she wanted to get the information she needed, she had to shed her armor, her vulnerability. Their relationship with Angela was exclusively working, but when Charlotte was betrayed by loved ones, she was the only one who sympathized with her. Richard's opinion, so she decided to ask him if she had her reasons for doing so, in his opinion. He agreed that it was kind enough that at least she didn't turn her back on her friend when she thought she was surrounded by only traitors. Such an answer seemed to the girl rather self-confident, which she openly informed Richard. Their journey led them to a rather mysterious place that Angela was probably talking about. Under it hid the secret base of the organization, which represented illegal substances from various corners of the empire. That new type of poison was brought from the east thanks to this grouping. People who were suppliers rented ships from small traders and thus transported their goods without being noticed. Such a large business seemed to Richard a rather primitive criminal pyramid. When I opened one of the chests, which was already almost on the ship, the guy informed me that this scheme remains undisclosed until now due to connections with the local authorities. Herbs, which were most often transported illegally, as the doctor claimed, did not give an effect immediately in their pure form. In order to become a poison capable of killing a person, they undergo thorough processing. There are even rumors that the newly developed drugs are being tested on humans, thanks to such a large flow of migrants from the East. If the girl in front of Angela was really Charlotte, then she should have come and seen what her friends had turned the empire into in just 5 years, destroying it with their own hands. Upon entering the small building, Charlotte and Richard were immediately accosted by locals who were definitely not pleased with their visit. Turning to the Count, the girl explained that to solve this problem, if they are too limited in time. However, despite everything, Charlotte wanted to see, at least with one eye, exactly what they had done to the collapse of their empire. Agreeing to the girl's request, the boy asked her how long it would take, looking at his pocket watch. The man on the other side of the room continued to argue that both guests should leave peacefully, saying goodbye to them. However, his statement was quickly stopped by the tape that appeared around his throat. In a moment, Charlotte threw him in a completely different direction, trying to be ready for the attack, the arrest of those present. However, observing the strength of the bravest of them, the girl understood that it would take her no more than 40 seconds to neutralize the target. Already in the morning of the same day, Richard was in the room of his apartment, considering a plan for an inconspicuous escape. He had to remain unnoticed by the sleeping Charlotte without waking her. However, the picture he saw in front of him now was not at all the same as what he saw at dawn. That with the help of a single ribbon, Charlotte herself was able to overcome all the men within the composition. Since Charlotte needed a little rest, Richard decided to deal with everything on his own, before informing Simon about his trip to the market. Also, the player wanted the butler to tell him when the crew would be ready. Being in her office, the mayor of Oberhofen continued to sigh tiredly, commenting on the confrontation of the unknown with all her efforts. She learned that an unknown girl and a young man had come to her town and caused a commotion. The head of the trade guild had been bragging all along that he had found someone he could do business with reliably, but apparently he was wrong. But all thoughts about the noise in the late hours were interrupted by one of the subordinates, who informed her that a visitor had come to her. The woman was against letting into her office the person who had warned about her sudden visit even the day before, and ordered a subordinate to tell the guest that even Silk from the East would not allow him to see her. However, despite all the woman's efforts to explain that she was too busy for visitors, Count Keitel appeared in front of her in a moment, apologizing for the distraction. Seeing Richard in front of her, the woman could not even imagine that Count Keitel would visit her very small town on the way to the capital. The woman was very nervous, because she was worried about the purpose of the arrival of the person who deprived her half-sister of the right to take the place of the Grand Duchess. She thought that Count Keitel's appearance would match his well-built image, but when she saw him, her opinion suddenly changed. Upon the boy's statement that he was leaving the confines of his room that night, the woman's face became even more nervous, but he did say that he had some important information for the mayor of this town, which she was to see in a moment. He also warned that a woman may find this document quite familiar. Presenting to Charlotte the same silk from the East, one of the mayor's subordinates reported that this fabric had a magical shine, in addition to an incredible softness, like velvet. But in addition to the rare cloth, the underling also presented her with a sword that had been made by the mayor as a parting gift, giving the girl a choice between these two items. In addition to the subordinate, the Count himself was also in the room, who asked Charlotte's opinion about all the above-mentioned things. The girl herself answered that she did not see the point in such trifles at all, so she did not even know what to take among them. The second of the mayor's subordinates noted that they both heard a negative response to the offer of items. As they left the room, heading down the hall to the exit, they looked rather slumped over from their previous situation. In answer to Charlotte's inquiry as to what it was the Earl had done to cause her to receive such a rush of great generosity in the morning, he replied that he had pointed out to the mayor some of her immoral acts. He recalled that in this meeting with the mayor, he said that the pier was usually deserted early in the morning, but he heard noises coming from the Trade Guild warehouse and decided to look there. Inside the premises, he found 10 children who were imprisoned, and when the boy started a conversation with them, they informed him that they had been kidnapped and were soon to be sold into slavery. But, as he recalled, there was an active law in the empire that prohibited human trafficking. The woman knew about it and actively denied her involvement in these events. Relying on all the mayor's answers, in which she remarked that she knew nothing about this situation, Count Keitel asked her to look at the magazine. In the pages of the journal, it is indicated that all the goods that arrived on the ships were exempted from paying taxes on the grounds that they were supplying entertainment goods. Even if she didn't know about the act of having children, she definitely should have known about the case of non-payment of taxes. She understood very well that if her careless attitude to tax evasion became known in the palace, then the emperor would certainly not approve of her, to which the woman asked the count to close his eyes to this for the first and last time. If this was the last case, then the mayor should have dealt with it accordingly before His Highness's investigators arrived at the location. Richard told Charlotte that he first punished the trade guild, then conducted an inspection of the stock in the warehouse and confiscated some goods. Along with the importation of poisonous herbs, other items of illegal trade were seized, which usually concealed the involvement of traders in this case. However, he couldn't do anything now because they all had broken bones. And when these rumors get their volume, the situation will become quite dangerous. Only that all the chests were taken from the warehouse and thrown into the sea. However, Charlotte, in turn, was more concerned about the children they found imprisoned in the warehouse. Richard reported that most of them had no families and nowhere to go, but there were enough resources in the north to shelter them. For a long time, in addition to this, the head of the city kindly agreed to provide all the labor force that was necessary for the transportation of children. After hearing the full story from the mouth of Richard himself, the girl admitted that it really struck her, and most of all, she was impressed by the fact that the boy managed in such a short period of 2 days. This could be the reason that next time Charlotte could trust him to negotiate and check all the documents. Focusing on the fact that she was a girl who broke the law, using Richard for revenge, and he is not in the choice of errands for the girl. However, Richard noted that Charlotte was a human being first and foremost, and the division of responsibilities at the heart of their actions would help make the work more efficient. In this case, Charlotte could do nothing but thank her interlocutor for instructing her to participate. Remembering all the events related to Albert, the girl remembered that he was always one step ahead of her. Their duties were divided between the sword and the precious star. In turn, it seemed that because of this, her hands were up to the elbow in blood. However, despite all these factors, a person appeared who promised that he would become a shield for the girl that would protect her. It all felt like a true partnership between the two of them. In the 2 weeks that had passed since their conversation, Dorothy had sent a reply saying that she would take in the children they had saved. Richard's sister probably thinks he hates her, but she never gives up on his requests. It was true, and although she was under the influence of quite rare diseases, she was strong in her spirit. She was a kind person who always took care of children who were left without blood. Charlotte tried her best to do everything for Albert, but she knew full well that he would spend the next 5 years bringing the East to ruin, just as he had done to the capital. And her lonely atmosphere was interrupted by Angela, who reported that the former emperor also did not make people's lives better after conquering neighboring states. Every year things only got worse, but this cyclical loop had to be broken by the new ruler, who became Albert. Wanting to hear the continuation of this story from the woman's lips, the girl came closer to her. However, as soon as the woman saw an opportunity before her to grab Charlotte, she did so, and also remarked that the girl's blood vessels were slightly strained. Angela also couldn't help but pay attention to such a powerful aura that came directly from Zuzu's body, which helped her truly understand that it was Charlotte. Not having a formal greeting before that, the girl decided to take advantage of the moment and announced that she was extremely glad to meet Angela. Since their relationship did not change its direction even for 5 years and remained working, the woman could not help but congratulate Charlotte in accordance with these requirements. However, when the woman addressed the girl named Charlotte, she in turn refused and asked to be addressed as Zuzu from now on. She thanked Angela for helping her find the poison. It was with the help of her story that the girl was able to take revenge for Duchess Richt. Charlotte explained that their situation together with Count Cadel was quite complicated, and in such a case, the doctor could only assume the fact that they together intended to kill the emperor. However, being quite close to her interlocutor, the girl was not going to hide anything from her. Also, in addition to her frank confession, Charlotte reported that she had a direction to the capital together with this same earl. Suggesting that the woman leave her present life and go to a bright future, the woman couldn't agree to make a decision so quickly, but she informed them that she could join them right now in case they really needed her help. Angela's help wouldn't really be out of place on the two of them's little trip, but Charlotte had to let the woman know that their journey would not be as easy as one might imagine. Without replying to this, the woman also shared with her information about the conclusion of a deal by an unknown person with the main trafficker of illegal substances. She knew for sure that one of them was loyal to the emperor, and it was because of this that the woman was a little afraid of revealing her identity. So she assumed that with such a powerful acquaintance and her rather influential ally by her side, she would be safer than alone. As was to be expected, Albert also watched over his public figures before winning them all over to his side. Without even trying to hide something from Charlotte, the woman in a moment called the name of the same merchant, who was Hilarion. The girl informed Richard about this when they were already alone. Among the people who were Charlotte's subordinates, he was the only one who was faithful and reliable, but the authorities were completely against him, and he began to protest on the slightest occasion. And it all ended with the fact that he falsely testified about the girl to the emperor. Sitting down, apparently, he managed to make all the tracks, and now he found a way to make a lot of money in the capital. It was he who handed over the trading report with the conducted test to the head. Richard was sure that this Hilarion was somehow connected with the poison that was brought to the capital of the empire from the east. Charlotte already had a plan about the fact that when they get there, they will first of all look for those who have been draining life from the capital for many years and get rid of them. A similar plan was also supported by Count Cadel, who picked up the girl's initiative, asking her permission to participate as well. However, before everything, the girl also had to inform Richard that she needed some favor from him. This service consisted in the fact that the girl wanted to visit some place that was located on the road to the capital. When Charlotte was asked where exactly she wished to stop, the girl replied with a confused look that their coach was to stop at Morn, where she had been born. In the central part of the southern lands, there is a whole strip of rural land. That is why grain crops such as barley and wheat are the main source of farm income. For quite a long period of her childhood spent within this settlement, the girl kept in her memory just such a picture of Morn. Being next to the girl, namely behind her, Richard, heading after her, reported that being on this, he felt calm. And so it was. It seemed so quiet, because apart from temple trips and various festivals, there was no entertainment. Alberta's other children wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, explaining their desire that there was too little room for their big dreams. These thoughts were very different from Charlotte's, because all this time she had spent in her false dreams, she realized that in order to find her happiness, she did not need to leave the apartment. The field was soon to end, as well as the hill on which Richard and Charlotte were walking, who reported that Morden's residence was just around the corner. Compared to other rather large houses in the capital, the Morden residence seemed like an ordinary abode of nobility in the countryside. However, the garden, which was painstakingly and carefully tended, gave this place a special charm, along with blooming roses, which made the eyes happy every time. Going a little further in front of the girl, only the ruins of the destroyed apartment appeared. Looking at it all, Charlotte noticed that Albert's style was clearly visible, as were, after all, his orders. As expected, the garden was completely destroyed, and all those fragrant roses were uprooted. On the remark about the absence of tombstones, Richard relied on the law of the empire, which sends everything associated with the culprits to an unknown space like nothingness. Iphenia, similarly, was desolation. Pointing to one side of the completely destroyed apartment, the girl reported that there was a luxurious fireplace in the place where her finger pointed. She remembered how her mother loved to sit in the evenings by this fireplace, which was decorated with topazes. Addressing Count Keitley, the girl reported that she was illegitimately born, as he could hear earlier. This meant that it was not natural for them to have a normal mother-daughter relationship. The woman hated Charlotte, but she, not wanting to cause unnecessary trouble and vain hopes for herself, responded in kind. But still, in her soul, there was at least a small portion of love for the Countess, which she decided to inform only before her death. Her stepmother thought it was strange. On the brink of death, Charlotte decided to apologize. She cursed her fate and the fate of her husband for the fact that, having intervened, Charlotte appeared in the world. All the close people of the girl believed that she deserved to die when she is so out of her element. They all knew that she would lead them to disappointment and drag everyone else down with her. It was these words that the girl heard during all her days spent in such a peaceful area and remembered right now. Realizing that the girl was currently in a state of complete anxiety, Richard decided to pull her out of her own memories by touching her hand. Tears of sadness continued to appear on her face. She did not understand the good reasons for which she had to suffer such a punishment throughout her life. When his hands felt on Charlotte's shoulders, she also felt the warm embrace she found herself in. In a moment, she, accompanied by Richard, found herself in an unknown environment, the atmosphere of which was significantly different. Realizing that such a thing was quite akin to magic, she assumed it was at her companion's instigation. Of course, the change in their surroundings was related to magic, or rather, it was just a simple illusion. Turning her attention to the appearance of Richard, who was in front of the girl, she noticed that his appearance had also undergone changes. The boy, in response to this, noted that, as a form of reassurance, he decided to use quite a bit of his own strength. Looking into the bright blue eyes of the boy, Charlotte really felt relief in her soul. After reporting that the girl had finally calmed down, the boy changed the appearance of the forest from blue back to yellow-hot in just one moment. If the girl didn't know about the existence of magic, she would definitely be more surprised. But for now, her face showed only acceptance of the fact that they were back. She wondered if Richard was condemning the very Charlotte who, as Albert's swordswoman, had killed his brothers. Knowing how passionate the battle between siblings can be for a place on the throne, the boy could not condemn the girl for not deviating from the usual events. She had exactly such a belief, continuing to comfort herself with similar thoughts. However, even under the condition that the girl no longer committed crimes, she still participated in the return event, which led to the fact that the children were left without blood. She was also involved in the death of Duchess Richt, and according to the owner of the body in which she was. The fact that Albert took the Emperor's place did not lead to the best results. On the contrary, it left behind a lot of mistakes that could not be corrected. Charlotte really wanted revenge, but so far she could only imagine her massacre with Albert. But with rather dizzy thoughts, she could not imagine what would happen after that. The girl really knew that Albert still had no heir, but the seat of the throne should not be empty, because it could be occupied by the same Richard. Turning to the girl, the boy really wanted to know if she considered him someone who intended to take power over the empire in his hands. To this, Charlotte replied that, according to the information she possessed, there were still living inhabitants of Ephenia in the empire, and that Richard, in his turn, was the last prince of the kingdom. The emperor was alarmed that the inhabitants of the small kingdom could cause disorder, so he scattered them in different parts of the empire. So far, this has been the case, but this may change dramatically with another ruler. In this case, Charlotte offered her help, even with a rather large but. The change of dynasty of the empire may be an impetus for other military powers that have been hiding all this time. Their offensive after the information about the revival of Ephenia, and thus, the empire may be divided into several parts. The girl immediately warned that, on the condition that if the plans of Count Keitel included something more than ordinary revenge, then her condemnation would not keep him waiting long. Trying to get a lot more out of Richard, Charlotte asked what exactly was in his plans besides the usual revenge. She couldn't repeat her previous mistakes anymore, so she didn't want to continue helping the boy if he claimed the emperor's place. Seeing the disbelief in Charlotte's eyes, Richard quickly warned her that he had never in his life thought of himself as the heir to the throne. Such an answer, together with the silence that froze in the air, caused the girl to be surprised. In a moment, Charlotte's side was accusing Richard of telling the truth, but he still couldn't accept his fate due to the usual coincidence of his birth. His father could not protect either the country or its inhabitants. The only thing he could really do was help his wife escape, and Richard was lucky to survive. He believed that telling about his origin was not an entirely conscientious act. However, Charlotte claimed that even after hearing such an answer, she still refused to consider it a lack of any plan. Most likely, the girl knew that the rich Duke family and the imperial family have the same roots, and in the event of the death of an emperor who has no direct descendants, using all sources of information, everyone will start looking for a new emperor. The emperor was afraid for his own position, having among his rivals the Richt family, whose status was high, and decided to get rid of the Duchess. And if you look at the genealogical roar, then Dorothy is the daughter of the cousin of the current emperor. So in the event that the emperor is really deposed, then Dorothy will take his place, being a descendant of the imperial family, a truly great man who built a wall to protect himself and his own body. But even without looking at her brother, she still agreed to accept those children who were saved by Charlotte. Repeating himself once more, the Count concluded by informing his interlocutor that he was completely uninterested in the imperial throne. However, since he planned the murder itself, it is natural that he had a pretty good candidate for this position in the form of his sister Dorothy. After a while, He assumed that the emperor would have an unforgettable expression as a result of seeing before him the daughter of the person he considered a rival and killed in his place. Also, in addition to the confidence of both of them, there was the option that Albert would soon have an heir, which would make their position quite shaky. However, even with such a schedule, the two of them will be able to develop their further plan of action. Relying on such words from Richard, Charlotte remembered how many years ago she had heard a promise from Albert in this very place that when he became emperor, he would definitely put a pearl crown on Charlotte's head. All along, she had believed in this promise of an uncertain future, which, in the end, turned out to be just an ordinary promise, which, in addition to an ordinary lie, turned out to be death for her. But remembering, she realized that she had never once heard Richard speak prematurely about the future. All his conversations were mainly focused on the present. This made the girl fully accept the truth from Richard's mouth and truly believe in it. And soon she was able to agree to the continuation of their trip to the capital, reporting that after summing up, she felt much better. Remembering the very purpose of their journey, and the merchant remembered from Charlotte's lips, Richard announced that he would be the first to be punished. It was not a difficult task to find him. The question for the girl remained as to what exactly was the best way to punish him, but the boy slowed her down a little, arguing that it was worth paying a visit in the form of visitors to begin with. During the meeting, they should offer to buy out the organization, and in case of agreement, will be able to discuss all the details of the fact that there was a case of rejection, which could develop into a local conflict. Remembering the above, Charlotte was absolutely sure that they were not approaching the capital to pay a business visit to that human trafficker, but Count Keeley insisted on his point, claiming that the matter was different. This matter involved money only in the case of the desired acquisition of the lady's heart, even if it would cost him tens of thousands of gold. On this condition, but noted that she was not satisfied with the bid of 10,000 zlotys, and if Richard really wanted to buy her at that auction, then he should offer exactly 100,000 zlotys. It was these events that became the impetus for the future murder of Hilarion, as a result of which the girl began her revenge. On the evening of the same day of the auction, when Charlotte was already taking her place in her bed, the Emperor Albert was taking his place next to her previous body. Looking at her previous shell, he couldn't believe that this had actually happened. He recalled all the pleasant memories between the two of them. He remembered how she looked at Albert's hair, which he thought looked like straw. The sound of the door opening put an end to his projection of memories, but he announced loudly that he did not give permission to enter the room. However, even after hearing this, the Minister of Internal Affairs of the palace, everything that was in the room, standing at the door, Dartrick said that although he had not received permission to go to the room, he considered the problem urgent. Addressing the emperor, the man reported urgent information that Hilarion had been found dead. In addition to the murder, the criminals left behind a completely destroyed organization. This was followed by an offer to quickly remove him from the scene of the crime, because he was the person who found the poison. But such an unexpected death, on the contrary, led to the fact that they lost the opportunity to cover all traces. The emperor refused to believe that Dartrick had broken his farewell to Charlotte, only to tell him that he had missed the opportune moment. However, the man himself reported that this was not the real reason for his excessive visit, because observing how much time Albert spent near Charlotte's dead body, he thought that his obsession was creepy. Grieving is a normal human reaction to the death of someone close to him, but Albert was not to forget the fact of his first wedding night, which was soon to take place. It was a perfect day for the emperor to give the empress his full attention rather than sitting over the body of a lifeless friend. The answers to this did not come out of Albert's mouth at all. He only noted that he had previously heard about Earl Keitel's early visit to the capital. He had also heard that all the management of the existing duchy had been returned to the residents. But other than that, he had heard rumors that the estate was being renovated and rehired. It looked like all the talk about the true ruler of the north was true. But while their warm welcome to the ducal estate remains little more than small talk, and the emperor must return to the empress, addressing Dartrick, Albert asks that Charlotte be moved to his room. Trying to stop the emperor, the man loudly addressed him, informing him that his request exceeded all moral boundaries. Realizing that the minister refused to fulfill his request, the boy, turning to Charlotte, said that he would soon return. Approaching the door, accompanied by Dartrick, Albert admitted to himself that he greatly missed the time he had watched Charlotte, bewildered by the fact that he could only give her one ordinary flower. Already the next morning, one of the saleswomen suggested that Charlotte pay attention to a charming black hat, which was decorated accordingly with a black ribbon. The same saleswoman asked her to pay attention to carefully embroidered roses, which were located on the same ribbon, which were supposed to be the perfect decoration to complete Charlotte's image. Maybe Charlotte would actually have dared to buy this hat if it hadn't been for the price tag on it. For a similar price, you could buy a whole coach for this hat. There, the girl asked her interlocutor to show her something else. However, the conversation between the two girls was interrupted by a message that the hat should also be in their order. In a moment, Richard appeared in front of them, to whom the previous words belonged. Coming closer to him, the girl asked why he wanted to spend more than just one hat, the price of which was equal to the carriage. In response to this, he replied that this hat would suit the girl's face perfectly, as well as the rest of the expensive things. A rather small but tangible time, which included about several days, the residence of the Grand Duke Richt in the capital is crowded. Her guests include guests ranging from ordinary builders to people who want to meet the new Archduke in person. During her life, Anneliese rarely visited the capital. Although she was quite a busy woman, the sudden death of her younger brother, Antonio, had a big impact on her. On a visit to the capital, Antonio lost his seat and life as a result of opposing the invasion of Bithynia at the hands of the emperor. Suffering from shock and pressure, the boy died, leaving behind only the title of Earl. Already settling down on a soft sofa, the girl sighed heavily because of all the tiring events that took place throughout the day. It was clear that the emperor wanted to see the face of his rightful successor as he reappeared in the capital. Entering the room where Charlotte was now, Richard's hopes were fulfilled, and he indeed found her here. Congratulating him, the girl informed him that the house seemed quite good to her, answering his questions. Quickly changing the subject, she asked if Richard had taken the case to the end of the human trafficking case. Looking quite tired, he answered positively, because everything that seemed to be his duty, he perceived quite responsibly. Taking a seat next to his companion, Count Keatley announced that he had found a ledger that belonged to the same trafficker. Although he was engaged in not quite legal business, he treated it quite responsibly and properly. All the entries in his book were quite detailed, which made them easy to read. Remembering that Hilarion had died at the girl's own hands the night before, she remembered that he was quite a cautious man. Answering the next question of his interlocutor, Richard confirmed that he was indeed going to pay a visit that same day, but a little later. The poisons and supply line were completely destroyed. In the report, the problems of Porto will be investigated as tax fraud. The dead region will also prefer a similar schedule of proceedings, and at the same time, all the points of contact of these two sides disappear, which looks like a brilliant job as a result. Dealing with the first only in the first task, Charlotte already wanted to also visit the reception hall in the palace, putting the sharp blade of her sword to Albert's body. Their conversation with Richard was joined by the butler, who informed them that he and the boy should be moving forward. Already saying goodbye to Charlotte, Richard unexpectedly heard a request from the girl to form a company. After only a moment's thought, Richard made the decision to agree to take Charlotte with him. Wandering through the corridors of the imperial palace, only two maids caught Charlotte's eyes, who stood calmly, trying not to disturb the guests. Quickly forming a plan in her head, the girl shifted her gaze to the companion, trying to stop him. She turned to Richard, reporting that her eyes fell on the maid, and then a plan formed in her head. She only asked him for one small kiss on the cheek, letting her know that it was addressed to the maids who were keeping a close eye on them. Of course, the boy could not refuse his companion, and leaned closer, giving the same small kiss. Having already left the emperor's palace, Charlotte returned to the estate, starting to look through all the papers. Reviewing all the information about the new workers, she noticed that none of them came from the north. She perfectly understood that not everyone could be so loyal and keep their mouth shut all the time. There was always a need to use this type of people, so she should get over it as soon as possible. In a moment, one of the maids entered Charlotte's office, informing her of the arrival of a new maid. A girl with a large suitcase in her hands appeared, passing through the open door. She congratulated Charlotte and thanked her for saving her after losing her job. The black girl reported that she was ready to do any work, including cleaning the chimney, and promised to put her best efforts into any assignment. However, giving the rather quiet girl a small smile, Charlotte revealed that she had not summoned her to task her with such a task. Being taught by experience, she knew that such people could not even look at their resumes. On the evening of the events that resulted in the expected death of Hilarion, Richard presented the girl with a whole letter, with a list of people who had worked for him before his husband's death. Looking at each of the names on this list, the girl stopped at one of the names, telling Richard that they needed to cross that name out. Asking Charlotte if she knew this girl, the boy Sam began to take a closer look at this person. In a moment, the girl said that the girl hiding under her index finger was an acquaintance of hers who knew how to keep her mouth shut. Already standing in front of the same girl, Charlotte clarified her previous words, informing that she needed an assistant who would accompany her to all kinds of social events, staying by her side. Approaching closer and closer to the black girl, Charlotte, calling her by the name Nanya, announced that she would perfectly cope with this work. This attitude towards the first unknown and quiet maid was due to the fact that she had been Charlotte's past life maid. Even after hearing ordinary words of thanks from Nanya's lips, the girl was able to quickly understand that she remained the same reliable child. It is reported that her new assistant was informed that her first task had already been started, and she had to proceed to its implementation immediately. Addressing Count Kaidli, one of the Emperor's knights asked him to proceed to the reception hall. In fact, the boy could not have imagined that the Emperor would so quickly move on to his visit. Even if Richard had real power, he was still Dorothy's representative, so the Emperor had to look at him as an ordinary provincial nobleman and postpone their meeting until later. Addressing the Emperor, the same knight reported that Earl Keetle was already behind him, after which Albert issued orders for Richard to enter the reception room. Congratulating the Earl of Keitel, the Emperor said that he was quite saddened by the death of the Grand Duchess and that he called her son to express his condolences in person. After thanking His Highness, Richard said that most likely the late Duchess would also be glad to hear the same from her side. He waited too long for this meeting, but he got it. Now he could see in his eyes the one who had killed his benefactor. Having invited Richard to sit down, the Emperor began the conversation with the fact that he had repeatedly heard that the boy was not related to his mother by blood, but Albert could not even guess that the guest in front of him was so young. The fact that Earl Keitel was currently around 22 made him 7 years younger than the Emperor. Although the late Emperor lived too long and was the lord of the provinces and high-ranking officials, but in essence he was just an old man. Personally, in Albert's opinion, it would be quite right if such a young man, like Richard, took the place of the head of the North. With a friendly smile on his face, Richard blamed the Emperor for such words, but in his heart he could not forgive him for the insult towards his adoptive mother. He remembered well that this year she should have turned 50. She was a person who was burning with her will, and she could not be called elderly in any way. All the while continuing to keep his thoughts in a fairly calm state, Richard reported that he was always grateful to His Highness for providing the labor to help them get the mine up and running. Although Count Keitel pretended to forget all the pressures of the North about how the Emperor himself ended up, he remembered it perfectly, which led to the conclusion in Richard's head that he was not a simple person. In addition to the mine, Richard also reported that they were able to resume construction in the unexplored areas, along with the agricultural deals being ready to go. All such information did not cause any emotion on Albert's face, and in response to all the stories of Count Keitel about his achievements, the Emperor asked him about the weather in the north. He wanted to know if it is true that the climate there is so harsh, which is colder than the capital. Richard was a little worried by such a changed topic, but he could not refuse to answer, so he told about the rather cold winter, which from time to time sweeps the kingdom with blizzards. Following the explanation, Richard touched on a not entirely pleasant topic, reporting that her death was most likely due to hypothermia. However, observing the rather gloomy reaction of the Emperor to these words, the boy apologized for touching on an unnecessary topic. He called the management of the prison not too strict. As a result, the supervisors did not fulfill their duties responsibly and allowed that one of the criminals was able to escape. While continuing to apologize to the Emperor for his imprudence, Richard said that even if he was born again, he would not be able to pay for his incompetence and talkativeness. After this excuse, the Emperor decided to take pity on Earl Keetle and order him to raise his head again. Changing the subject again, Albert said that there were reports of corruption in the East, which Richard himself had uncovered. He praised him and complimented him that he was quite good at catching rats, but he was also sure that rats were also present in the out-of-reach zone, and Albert was too worried that it would not be possible to catch them so easily. In response to this, the boy sitting in front of the Emperor reported that he had heard a rumor that a rat had been caught in the capital relatively recently. Among these capital rats was Hilarion, at whose capture Richard was personally present. Whether he knew it or not, the Emperor paid another compliment to his guest, telling him that he had excellent hearing. Also deciding to continue the conversation about some of the rats, Richard also informed Albert that there were a lot of rumors about some of the guests as well. In the report on the affairs of the North, too much attention was paid to all the merits of the affairs of the East. Even through the text, the problem with Hilarion was mentioned. All this will look pretty good in the eyes of the Emperor and will be seen as a desire to achieve greater success. Turning to his interlocutor, the Emperor said that he intended to give him an award for his actions in the East. Albert also wanted a personal meeting between Richard and the Empress and invited the boy before him to attend a ball in honor of the coming of spring. Richard's report was fully heard, so now the boy could leave in peace, going to his apartment. However, Richard still had one more unfinished business, which was entered in the list of all his actions during the meeting with the Emperor. Perhaps the thing that the guest wanted to try to ask of the Emperor was a lot of rudeness, but it was some trump card up his sleeve that he asked for in order to fully carry out his plan. Heading the carriage in an unknown direction, accompanied by her assistant, Charlotte looked out the window, examining the outskirts of the capital. Turning her unexpected gaze in the direction of the new assistant, the girl decided to ask if she was still worried about the presence of mistrust in the new mistress. In response to this question, Nanya answered with a refusal, but she could not quite explain why she was still so shackled. Not hearing the desired answer, Charlotte sincerely asked her assistant if she was asking the appropriate question. How did her new master know about all the deals of her former master that even Hilarion did not know about? To this question, too, Charlotte did not hear the answer she expected. However, the girl in front of her looked as if she had indeed revealed the truth. Knowing Nanya well, Charlotte quickly realized that all her assumptions turned out to be accurate, and her assistant remained as cautious as before. In her past, Nanya was a maid who was introduced to Charlotte along with the accommodation. Even despite her relatively young age, the maid in front of her was surprisingly silent and obedient. During a more detailed acquaintance with the maid, Charlotte realized that she liked the girl and that she liked Nanya's character. With the help of this character, it was this servant who gained the trust of her mistress in order to deliver secret messages to her. Apparently, when the girl was imprisoned, Hilarion appropriated Nanya as a trophy. Of course, Charlotte would like to stop being so cautious, but it was better for her and those around her if no one but Angela knew about her true identity. Zuzu, to the rest of them, revealed that she was related to the Grand Duke of the North and knew all the affairs of the prison. The girl knew that Nanya's mother once fell ill, after which she recovered, and her older sister successfully married a gentleman and was released from the role of head of the family. Even after getting into the apple of the entire biography of her assistant, the girl still did not receive an answer from her. About the same, this silence and quietness of character pleased Charlotte, as before, about which she openly informed Nanya herself. The girl understood very well that in order to earn the trust of her assistant, she would have to take slow but sure steps. However, in addition to the trust itself, they would also have to go a long way. Walking into the room, Charlotte was approached by her assistant, who started the conversation with her question during Charlotte's question. Even after getting into a fairly advantageous position, the girl was still alarmed, because the atmosphere was quite difficult. However, Charlotte herself, wearing a rather confident smile on her face, told her not to worry. The mistress of the assistant reported that she might be surprised. As soon as Charlotte laid her eyes on her and decided to hire, she immediately found something like an informant. Suddenly, their rather relaxed atmosphere, along with the conversation, was disturbed by one of the rude people of the institution in which they were currently staying. The man, immediately starting his conversation with the ladies with complaints, reported that what they might have done wrong was not at all for aristocrats. Turning to her assistant, Charlotte immediately had to warn her that the sight she was about to see would shock her even more. However, the girl was sure that even if her assistant was shocked, she would behave properly. Having just removed the ribbon from her rather expensive hat, Charlotte immediately assumed a fighting stance, glaring menacingly at the same man. Seeing that the girl in front of him was already intending to attack first, he also raised his hand, swinging towards Charlotte. He did not even have time to cover half the distance between them with his hand, when the same ribbon from the hat grabbed her tightly, pulling it tight. With one action, the girl in front of him pulled the ribbon, thereby throwing him in a completely different direction. Already on the floor, the man looked defeated and caused surprise among the rest of the guests of the establishment. Accordingly, Nanya was also with all the guests, who definitely did not expect to see something like this from her new owner. Turning to the rest of the people present in this establishment, Charlotte wanted to see exactly what kind of reception they would give the visitor after what he had seen. In the past, a situation arose between Charlotte and Nanya, as a result of which the maid herself approached her mistress. Holding out a small bag of money to Charlotte, the girl asked her what exactly this gesture was supposed to mean. Looking rather surprised by the question, Charlotte replied with a calm expression that it was the usual small reward for effort. Noting that she hadn't done anything to make this happen, Nanya looked quite confused, but Charlotte herself tried to calm her down, saying that the maid should have thought of it as a small bonus. Even after receiving this gift from the former owner, the girl was still unsure of the correctness of accepting this award. Once again assuring her that everything was normal, Charlotte noted that in similar cases before this, Nanya should have just taken what they wanted to give her. Such were the words of her former mistress, whom everyone called a thief, not even knowing her true nature. On the day Charlotte was sent to prison, Nanya continued to wonder how this could have happened. The rest of the men who had dared to stand up for their acquaintance also found themselves on the floor exactly a moment after their attempted attack. Not even feeling tired, Charlotte, with a very slight smile on her face, asked a rhetorical question if this was really the end of this fight. Charlotte was brought out of her thoughts about her own strength by a woman's voice telling her to stop and climb up. Turning to the shocked Nanya, the girl called her after her, informing her that it would be better if her assistant did not lag behind her. To tell the truth, the assistant's mind was dominated by a feeling of some nostalgia, which prevailed over the feeling of fear. She could not understand from where, because they were not at all similar. While following her new mistress, Nanya, for some unknown reason, suddenly remembered her previous mistress, whose memories the girl revealed to her. The Empire had quite a few different ways of getting information, including learning it directly from the mouths of spies. In the Imperial Palace, there is a separate corps that belonged to the Emperor and is engaged in the search for these spies. But the secret and most banal hints always came from below, and not from social salons or reception rooms. The same now, in front of the girl and her assistant, was the woman who had the largest network of information in this spy system. In welcoming Queen-in-Charge Martha, Charlotte complimented her that even at quite a respectable age, she looked the healthiest of the two ladies who had come to her with the request. Paying attention to the fact that in front of Marta was a rather young lady, the woman was surprised, because it could not be that she already knew a girl of that age. However, she could not, and in return, could not answer with a lie, and reported that there was no more famous spy and information gatherer on the streets of the capital, better than Marta. That girl, being not the first time at Marta's reception, knew very well that if she did not get through the security, she would not be able to get to the woman herself. Carefully listening to all the information that the girl told her, the collector drew some conclusions for herself. Previously, the woman considered Charlotte to be an ordinary doll with which Count Ketel has fun. But now her eyes have opened. Such a conclusion prompted Charlotte herself to think that Martha was finding information about her. Addressing the fair-haired guest, the woman wanted to hear what exactly she wanted to buy, and the price that would not exceed the set limits. Then the collector gladly gave her this. Handing the woman a small note, the girl said that she would pay the full amount as soon as her order was fulfilled. In a moment, the girl announced that she wanted to buy all the information about those persons whose names were indicated on the note, which was now in Martha's hands. The woman completely covered all the information down to the smallest detail, including even their lunch menu. Wandering through the corridors of the residence, the doctor asked the maids questions about Charlotte's whereabouts, to which one of them informed her that the lady was in the garden. Paying attention to the same maid, Angela said that it was not necessary to address her as a doctor. To servants of the estate like her, she should have been Angela. Looking at the daffodils that Charlotte had grown, Richard thought they were incredible. He asked his interlocutor what exactly she planned to grow next time from flowers. Since the girl herself did not know how to answer this question, because the variety of flowers that could look good in their garden was limitless, she suggested that Count Ketel put a similar question to Angela. The right answer had to do with the fact that it was Angela who taught Charlotte one rule about narcissists. Their leaves and roots are easily confused with vegetables, which is why they can be used as poison. However, time passed rather quickly. Under the influence of such a fast passing of time, they did not even notice when the day of the reception at the Imperial Palace arrived. It was the very day when Zuzu's ordinary maid was to make her debut in secular society with the appropriate status. This debut will take place on the same day that the thief Charlotte will see the faces of her enemies again. Turning to the companion, Richard said that before they left the garden, he should look at her earrings. A similar decision was due to the fact that one of the girl's earrings was attached unevenly. As he adjusted her, Richard knew that Charlotte might be in pain at this point because the gem was not positioned correctly. His work was complete, but the earrings were again symmetrical, adding completeness to Charlotte's look. Not understanding what exactly Richard did, the girl once again asked him about his actions. Seeing the exaggerated smile on his face, she immediately realized that under the guise of messing with her earrings, he had cast a spell on one of them. A telepathic spell was now placed on one of the girl's earrings. She immediately felt its effects after not noticing the Count's mouth opening in front of her as she heard his voice. It was thanks to this magic that the girl could hear all the thoughts that were spinning in the head of the boy in front of her. She could also speak to him in a similar manner by simply sending her voice along with her aura. With the help of fairly clear instructions, the girl was able to project her thoughts towards her interlocutor on the first try. Just as she accepted the fact that the soul could move between bodies, her mind was shocked by the new magic of Iphenia, who could project thoughts into conversation. However, this magic was not an ordinary lesson on an even ground, because they were going to be present in a palace where they would not be able to communicate so easily, so they had to use her transmission of information in secret from others. However, Richard immediately warned Charlotte that it is better not to abuse this magic, but his explanation was interrupted by Angela, who burst into the garden. Seeing that her appearance was rather unwelcome, she promised to return in 10 minutes. Looking a little confused, Charlotte asked Richard what had just happened. In his opinion, only the two of them should know the whole truth about Iphenia's magic, so their allies should also remain in the dark. Having already attended the ball in the imperial palace, Charlotte, accompanied by Richard and her assistant, watched the ladies chat among themselves, exchanging gossip. In addition to the usual guests, Albert's henchmen were also present at this ball, including Pascaline, who considered arranging a ball for the sake of some young count too big a deal. Such treatment of the rightful heir of the Richt family was too insulting, as Dartrick, accompanied by Irene, reported. The man said that at best he would give them all a warm welcome, but he also meant that this whole ball was already too much for one person. Addressing Pascalina, Irene reported that the girl had not been out with her husband for quite some time, so she wanted to know where he was. Nodding toward the hall, the girl informed Irene that her husband, Oscar, was right there, engaged in conversation with other men. Apparently, the man has settled down quite well in high society thanks to his wife. However, the most important topic of conversation was to become Count Ketel, who was accompanied by his former maid. Hearing the not-so-kind words towards the Earl's companion, Dartrick ordered Irene and Pascaline to stop. He reported that at the moment they had absolutely no time for such conversations and condemnations of someone's choices. Their attention had to be fixed on the people and all the information they possessed, because among Hilarian's goods, there were also representatives of the Forest City. Pascalina should have known this best of all, because they belonged to the same inhabitants of the Forest City. Stepping closer to her husband, the girl claimed that they didn't know for sure if they were related, but she had no business with the circumstances the rascals got into, so she told Dartrick not to put them on the same level.
However, in response to this, the man declared that the representatives of the forest people are the same.
When Hilarion came to Dartrick, the man was going to use him as a secret money fund, and in return turn a blind eye to his human trafficking. But now, having nothing from him, the man had to assume that Hilarion did not have much chance for further cooperation from the very beginning. Changing the subject, Irene also joined the conversation between the two, who said that their colleague Jonathan still couldn't get over the shock. It was a pretty good excuse for not attending the event and being responsible once again. In turn, his colleagues knew perfectly well that Jonathan went to that person without a doubt. Having decided to rally her colleagues, Irene wanted to end the conversation there and go downstairs, because if they were late, even for a minute, then the Emperor would be displeased. Having almost left her previous places, one of the people present presented to the man next to her the account of the wedding night between the Emperor and the Empress. Being in his own displeasure at the expense of Albert's attitude to his duties, Dartrick had to remain silent. Approaching the center of the ball, accompanied by his wife and one of his knights, the Emperor looked rather worried. Turning to her husband, Bathilda Karnstein, who was his wife, decided to ask him if he was excited about anything. Opening the door in front of him, the Emperor entered the main hall of the ball, where he was greeted by all the guests along with his wife. Pulling on his face a smile that was quite familiar to him, he continued to examine everyone who came to his ball, anticipating that today would be the same banality. He had to successively dance a too boring dance, drink a glass of wine with an already familiar and simple aroma, and listen to all the intentions of his subjects. In a moment when the attention with his persona started to subside little by little, he was able to relax his face and finally show all his frank inspiration. In Albert's memories, Charlotte was still there, looking at him with a warm look, and he, in turn, considered her everything to him. Trapped in his own thoughts, Albert completely fell out of reality, missing the first guests approaching him and his wife. Examining the girl in front of her, Bathilda could not refrain from complimenting her, calling her a real doll. Finally, being able to fully come to reality, both raised their heads. Obeying the emperor's orders, Richard presented himself and his companion to the emperor and empress. As soon as Albert was able to see the girl's face in front of him, he plunged into a real shock when he couldn't control his own emotions. Informing about her rather low status, the girl told the emperor that it would be enough for her if he called her Zuzu. Still having inexplicable emotions on his face, which were significantly different from the previous ones, Albert once again asked the girl about her name. Repeating her name a second time, the girl asked the emperor if he did not find something funny in the name, judging by his confused reaction. Albert sent his rather inappropriate behavior to the fact that he had confused the girl in front of him with another person. Such a reaction caused the empress, who was next to him, to feel concern for her husband. Assuring that his physical and moral condition remained in order, the emperor was to bid farewell to the guests of his ball, sending them off to enjoy this invitation. Addressing the emperor once more, Count Ketel thanked him and his companion once more for the invitation to this ball. Remaining alone with his thoughts, the emperor could not find the reason why all the memories of the past flashed through his mind in such a bright flash. Using the magic of telepathy, Richard began to speak to Charlotte, who reported that there was a rather joyful atmosphere around her. She couldn't help but agree with this statement, because she had been waiting for this moment every day for these long 5 years. Wandering around the entire hall of the luxurious ball, which was arranged by Emperor Richard, all this time he heard whispers behind his back and about his own personality. In addition to the usual whispers, he also had to talk to other ballgoers to make his real presence known. As the emperor had previously reported, Richard had indeed shocked all his new acquaintances with his appearance, which was quite different from all expectations. More and more noblewomen joined the talk that some ordinary maid Zuzu was very lucky in choosing a companion. To most of them, it was quite unexpected that she could even enter the imperial palace while simply being accompanied by an earl. Not forgetting his true purpose of attending this ball, Richard kept an ear out of the corner of his ear for all the gossip that was wandering around the hall. In this way, he came to know about a person among the civil servants who is a swineherd. Paying attention to the fact that the emperor was in his place, avoiding the dance, Richard immediately informed Charlotte about this. She knew that Albert is usually present only at the first dance, and after that he hardly gets up from his seat. Currently engrossed in the conversation with the ministers, he continues to guard his seat. Then the boy suddenly became interested in the location of those 4 genes, who are the closest people to the emperor. Looking around, Charlotte in a moment saw a rather tall woman standing at the door who was acting marshal, Pascalina, who came from the forest people, where she held a rather high position, like a princess, but managed to escape from her native home. Paying attention to the man who was next to Albert, the girl referred to him as the Minister of Internal Affairs of the palace, Dartrick. He is a very unestablished man, since he was born into a family of a court noble, but he was quite proactive, because he was able to come from the capital to Morden in order to meet with Albert. According to Charlotte, he was the most ambitious of the 4, to present the Count in the next member of the Brilliant 4, as she appeared right in front of him. Irene's invitation to a small dialogue sounded quite spontaneous, as the player was determined to talk only with Charlotte. Without falling in spirit and face in the mud, the next reference from his companion, Richard heard that the head of the guild union was standing in front of him, who used to be an ordinary person, but is currently a marquise. After hearing this information, the boy happily greeted the woman in front of him. Following Charlotte's warning that the first impression of Irene is always wrong, the girl herself heard a guess about the Count's true love for his companion, because she herself saw his glances toward Zuzu. However, in response to this, the player said that he was taking care of the rest of the guests, whom she could prevent from enjoying the day, although judging by everything, it was Irene who was giving Richard trouble right now, asking such careless questions. Among all the guests, Charlotte could not find only Jonathan. He was one of those people who were not so easy to understand on the first, second, and even third try. Feeling some fatigue from such a long period of time, which the girl devoted to the usual dance, she decided to rest for a moment, thinking about the fact that all the movements of her dances were identical to the same Charlotte, whom everyone considered a criminal, but no one present even paid attention to it. From now on, the same thief Charlotte was completely in the past. Besides, even Albert himself could not recognize his old friend in the girl. Of course, that kind of thing was not part of their joint plan with Richard, but the girl was already holding back the fire that was burning in her soul with her last strength. Looking around him, Count Keitel realized that he had lost sight of the same elderly woman he had been following throughout the evening. In a moment, the same woman appeared behind Charlotte, which her companion informed her with a warning. Having fully prepared for a conversation with an unknown person, the girl again tried on a calm and relaxed account. Turning to Zuzu, the same elderly woman whom Richard had been following informed the girl that the Empress was calling her and she should follow her. Showing some note of surprise on her face, Charlotte quickly looked around the woman, trying to understand what exactly awaits her during the conversation with the Empress. A warm smile appeared on her face, and looking at the restrained woman in front of her, she agreed to walk with her. Already being in the same room with Her Highness the Empress, Batilda reported that although they had recently met, they had never been able to have a conversation. If we talk about the first goal that Charlotte planned to do, then we can say that she almost accomplished it, because the girl who was closely related to her is now right in front of the girl. Following the decree from Her Highness, the girl left her seat, coming a little closer. Looking rather stiff, Charlotte remarked that she was very embarrassed to be summoned by Her Highness. Bertilda Karnstein was the only daughter of the Duke, and she came from a noble family, representatives of which became empresses for a long time. Although her chances of becoming the chosen one were not so high, she was lucky enough to become Albert's wife. Taking a seat next to Her Highness, Charlotte still kept her head down as she continued her thoughts on the purpose of her summoning. Wanting to introduce herself again, she emphasized her name. In the depths of her soul, she was already building theories about the fact that the new Empress is trying to discipline the commoners who are trying to get into high society. Examining the girl in front of her once again in detail, Her Highness Batilda came to the conclusion that she was seeing such a beautiful girl for the first time in the capital. Charlotte had expected to hear everything from Albert's wife, but it certainly wasn't this, so it confused her for a moment. With a bright smile on her face, Batilda revealed that she was not the only one who was under the influence of such an enchanting beauty, and her husband, Albert, also watched the ball guest in fascination. Turning to one of her maids, Her Highness the Empress asked her to bring a chair for the guest so that she could take a seat beside her, arguing that there was absolutely no need for a woman to act like that with an ordinary representative of the nobility like Charlotte, or rather, in her impression, Zuzu. However, the Empress herself claimed that the girl in front of her was just as much a citizen of the Empire as she was, so all these words were inappropriate. Watching as one of the maids actually brought a chair for her, Charlotte listened as Her Highness informed her that Her Highness had arranged this event especially for the Earl of Keighley. That is why the woman considered it her duty to behave accordingly with her companion, the main person of this ball. She considered it a necessary condition for her dignity as an empress. Quickly from the topic of her own duty to the personality of the girl before her, Her Highness Batilda wished to know the age of her guest. Sighing calmly, Charlotte really did not understand why Batilda treated her so kindly and always put a kind and bright smile on her face. After hearing the answer to her question, Her Highness remembered that at a similar age, before Charlotte's age, namely her 18th birthday, she had already begun to accompany Albert. This year she celebrated her 23rd birthday, where she would consider it a pleasant fact if a girl like Zuzu treated her like an older sister. There was not a hint of deception or attempted trickery in the look of the woman before Charlotte. Although Batilda was one of the reasons for Charlotte's collapse and imprisonment, looking at her now and analyzing the whole situation, the girl did not see her crime. Most likely, she was ordinary the girl who was attacked as soon as the election became known in narrow circles. In turn, Charlotte was only the inspiration of the conspiracy, and no more than a silly rival. However, the very fact of talking with the Empress will help Charlotte gain influence not only in secular society, but also at court.